the role that I've been asked to talk about is, are they good for the planet and their climate resilience? I want to, up front, put forward that millets are an incredible crop. They are highly resilient. You can grow millets in very harsh environments. If you go to Rajasthan and the dry areas of Karnataka or in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, or West Africa, you'll see millets are the crop that is grown in the harshest environment. And so that's going to become much more critical as climate change becomes important. And in these marginal environments, millets are the main staple. If you're in the desert and you take one step out of the desert, then the crop that you're going to see as a staple is millet. And we see that in India and we see that in Africa. And millets are grown in many countries. They're not just a staple in the very dry areas. As we know from Karnataka and elsewhere, they're very nutritious crops. They're grown as many households as nutritious foods for population. But let me go into more detail. You heard the Secretary for Agriculture at Karnataka this morning talk about millets as smart food. They are good for you. And we have experts in the room here, and we'll hear more about that in subsequent talks about how millets provide important micronutrients for consumers. They're good for the planet in terms of they have environmental characteristics that make them have a less impact on the environment and the physical resources that we use in agriculture. And they're good for the farmer. Farmers need to diversify their income, and millets provide opportunities for farmers to grow diversified crops and get returns out of them. So where maize will die because of drought, millet will produce grain. And so under those very harsh environments, millets are the best crop to grow in terms of producing yield. And as we look at climate change, so this is some work that's been published to look at the potential impacts of climate change. This is in Tanzania, not in India, but it'll be similar elsewhere. And you can see that as the world heats up and as water in many places becomes more scarce, that there's a significant impact on some crops. Common bean here is very badly impacted. Maize has a negative impact. So you see, and there's some impact on finger millet. But you see crops like groundnut, pearl millet, cassava and banana, actually the impact will be less in terms of the potential change in suitable areas. More areas of the world will have to grow pearl millet because areas of the world become unadapted to growing maize or sorghum, and you'll have to look to millet to fill that gap. And so there is this prospect of the area grown to millet increasing because of climate change, because of more area becoming unsuitable for other crops. Millets are good for the planet because they're generally grown in ecologies where there's not a need for high levels of inorganic fertilizers, pesticides and inputs. Now, it's a bit of a conundrum. At the moment, millet yields are low, I said, because there's not so many inputs, not so much fertilizer being put on them. And if we want to increase the yields of millet, and we might have to add to the inputs that go into the crop. But certainly with the yield potential of millets, it's nowhere in the same order as crops such as rice and wheat and maize. And as I said, millets provide well-adapted land use systems for these very harsh environments. In Rajasthan, there's 4 million hectares of millet grown in the A1 zone. There's upwards of 8 million hectares of millet grown in India, and most of that pearl millet is grown in very dry environments. Finger millet is also adapted to a very dry environment. If we did not grow millet in these environments, there's no alternative crop. It's likely that those lands would revert to grazing lands. And if they reverted to grazing lands, there'd be significant environmental impact of having livestock potentially overgrazing fragile landscapes. And so millet serves as an ecosystem service in providing land cover in these very fragile environments. In fact, I am mixing my talk as working for ICRISAT. We work in Asia, based here in India, but also Africa. And here's an example from West Africa, and my colleague Garth might talk a little bit more about millets in West Africa in a subsequent talk. But basically, there's this revegetation happening in West Africa around the millet areas. So farmers are managing their millets by the croplands by introducing fodder trees into that system that can provide nutrients to their cropping system. And this synergistic relationship between the trees and the crops have established an ecology that's quite successful. And so this parkland environment that you see in West Africa is growing in area as farmers are using the perennial vegetation in conjunction with pearl millet as the main farming system. And this is just some more pictures of what's happening in West Africa, and as a lead-in to you, Garth, in a subsequent talk. I mentioned earlier that millets don't depend heavily on inorganic fertilisers, and they don't, not generally grown under irrigation, so they don't use a lot of renewable resources such as irrigation water and fertiliser. And so they can quite happily get yields through organic agriculture, and that's why millets are associated often with organic agriculture because of the use of manures. When we talk about environmental pollution from cropping, that's either greenhouse gases or loss of nutrients in the environment. Millet-based systems aren't going to contribute much in the way of environmental pollution. There's very little loss of greenhouse gas into the environment and very little leaching of nutrients or solutes below the root zone. And so generally the environmental footprint of millet farming systems is much more positive than much higher input systems. And alternatively, the millets, particularly if you have a broader view of millets, including sorghum, can be used as biofuel. So there's lots of interest in using these crops either as fodder, as energy source of biofuel, or as in other products. And I think there should be a lot more research done on particularly the millets, pearl millet and the small millets, about what roles they can play in these alternative uses. I just wanted to finish by pointing out that ICRISAT partners internationally with those people doing research to provide opportunities for millet. And this CGR research program on grain, legumes and dryland cereals is a $400 million research program over 5 years, where we partner with the Indian Council for Agricultural Research in India and the state agricultural universities, but also many partners around the world, from companies such as the big companies such as Dow DuPont, Pioneer, Advanta, who are the main sorghum seed producers in the world, through to NGOs and SMEs in Africa and Asia. As I say, it's a global partnership about promoting millets as important crops in farming systems. It's a major research prospectus and research partnership, and I invite anybody here that's interested in this partnership to gain more information from them. So, as conclusion, this session is about making the case as millets being smart food. They are very nutritious for consumers. They have attributes that have a very strong component of land use systems in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. and they're good for farmers. Well, they have to be good for farmers. Farmers won't grow them unless they're profitable and they can return diversification into the farming system. So with those few words, that's the case for millets being good for the planet. Thank you.